Welcome to Connection is the Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Eden Shante. Today I welcome Dharma teacher Kali Basman, who beautifully combines Buddhist psychology, internal family systems therapy, and Yin Yoga. In her work, Kali explores the outer constructs of anatomy and traditional Chinese medicine, along with the more subtle inner processes of therapy and trauma healing. I really enjoyed my time with Kali, and I know you will too. Thanks for joining me on Connection is the Medicine podcast, and without further ado, let's dive right into the show. Welcome, Kali.
So good to be here.
How are you today?
I'm feeling privileged to have this mid-afternoon carved out to be with you. Although far from you geographically, we get to be right here together in a close connection and dialogue. So I'm honored to be a part of this.
Yes, you are in Colorado, in Boulder, which is a place that I love very much. And I am in Nosara, Costa Rica. And while it would have been incredible to meet in person, which we will in the future, it is wonderful to meet virtually and connect. And so we're going to start out with Kali welcoming us into a few minutes of connection, and then we'll begin our dialogue with some beautiful topics today.
What a great opportunity to touch in before we dialogue. So wherever you're listening in from, closing your eyes as an invitation to enter that sacred pause. And the pause always comes with the inquiry of what's life like right now, or how am I right now? Because for me, the very first beat of any practice is self-reflection. So what am I bringing in to this moment? Maybe you had a particularly chaotic morning, or you're feeling exhausted or overwhelmed. Maybe you're brilliantly inspired or enlivened. Maybe a little bit of both. So as we hover here at the doorway or the corridor to the inner world, that rich inquiry, how am I right now? What's here now? And then we'll connect for just a few moments to the breath. And so a reminder that the breath is an ally here. This kinship of turning what's subconscious into the foreground of the conscious mind. Each breath as an inwards. To being quite poised with self and the immediacy of this moment. And so as I breathe in, I do so evenly through both nostrils. And then the exhale, feeling like I'm settling into a warm bath, I just ride the out breath, that descent into the body. So breathing in evenly through the nostrils, like it's lighting up and sweeping through all that cerebral activity. The exhale, I breathe myself beneath the collarbone. A few more rounds like that. Inhale, pulling in freshly. And exhale, descending out of the head, out of even the transpersonal, relational content of the heart, and dropping into the belly. As I breathe out, I breathe myself down to what the Japanese call the hara, the belly, the center of self. So perhaps placing one or both hands here on the belly for a moment and just feeling this essence energy, what one teacher calls the elixir field, belly intelligence. And when you're ready, opening back up the eyes so we can begin together. Eden, such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you.
Thank you, Kali. I really appreciated that, and it was almost hard to leave that space. And so thank you for bringing us into that space. There were several pieces that impacted me, and I'd like to begin with just the whole idea of the pause and how important pause is in our lives. There is, especially in Western culture, so much mind, so much doing. And I just want to have you reflect a little bit more on the importance of pausing.
Beautiful. Yeah, what a rich inquiry. And so uh, opportune to speak about the sacred pause in the midst of, for me, what feels like such a cacophonous and little bit chaotic season in my world. I'm a new mother. My son's almost 2, and entering the mother matrix has been a whole new initiation into the complexity of what day to day can bring, and so much to balance. I know I'm far from unique in this sojourn of feeling like life is increasingly dense in its asks and in its momentum, in the sensory overload, in the stimulus. And then, of course, in all the roles that we play and all the hats we wear day to day, I'm feeling like just stacking those a bit higher than I ever have before. The pause is medicinal, right? It's an essential elixir to, as we did in that practice, come out of the head and all of that really brilliant, distillated, sometimes fragmented streams of the mind in problem solving and future tripping and past resentment and, all of that material. And then I mentioned too that even coming below, subterranean to the heart, the heart itself can also hold quite a lot of content. It's not always the most neutral or even blissful space to hang out in. If you're experiencing heartbreak right now, or uncertainty, or loss and grief, then the heart too has got a lot of brilliant, mysterious complexity to sort through. And so I was suggesting in that meditation that plunging into the deeper waters of Yes, what the Japanese call the hara, and it's a place, the low belly is a place to pause with because it moves slower than the mind. It moves slower than the reachings of the heart. It's this ancient instinctual receptivity. And so even just for a few breaths to pause on the hour and to inquire freshly anew, like, can I be here with myself right now? Like, really with myself, beneath all the parts I'm playing and all the weight I'm holding. It's a moment to realign with what one of my teachers called the juice of the stars. And so we remember here who we really are underneath the rigmarole.
Yeah, it's so easy to get carried away in thought and in doing, and whether we have tendencies towards depression or tendencies towards anxiety, and those energies can create momentums of their own. And so to take this time, to take time throughout the day, whether it's a minute or 3 minutes, and just simply be able to pause. The more that I take the opportunity to pause, the more I connect with that nourishing energy of the hara, because just in talking with you right now, the mind can be busy. And to hear from you, even the heart can be busy. Can you share more about the hara and the medicine of the hara?
For certain, for certain. It's really, the nexus of all of this biointelligence in the body and from a traditional Chinese medicine standpoint, so many of the meridians or so many of the yogic nadis pass through this stable center of gravity. I think of hara just beneath the navel as literally keeping us from falling off the planet. It's like our great stabilizer, this gravitational force field, the very center of self. And yes, the ability to plunge in beneath the collarbones and to feel like there's a deeper well or a reservoir. I mean, in the West, we know it now to be the belly brain, the secretion of serotonin, and the ability for the belly to make meaningfulness and memory. But there's another wisdom center here we tend to neglect. And so I'll just invite us throughout the dialogue today to keep touching in. And I like to bring my hands to the belly to just remind myself, it's brief and regular return. It's not that we need hours of meditation in each day, but regular routine intervals of practice, just a beat to place myself underneath the desire and the longing of the heart and the analytical problem solving of the head, and to move into the place where master archers and sumo wrestlers and method actors and the noblest of monks, all suggest that orienting in this low center of gravity has a stabilizing, neutralizing effect on whatever material we're holding presently.
What are some of the ways that a person really simply, who may never have explored this abdominal area, what are maybe a few little tips that you can share to help them simply connect with that space while they're doing what they're doing?
I think it's helpful on the kind of biogeological map of this body mind, to have a sense of hara being, this nucleus of connectedness that you can think of from really the base of the ribs through Muladhara, through the pelvic floor, that whole orb of connectivity. And because so many of us enter in the subtle body stream through the world of the chakras, I find it's accessible to think about hara as really the conglomeration of the first three chakras, right? So from mula, from the pelvic floor all the way to solar plexus, this like a Saturn ring around the center of the body. And then the very nucleus of that is about 3 fingers beneath the navel and 3 fingers in towards the spine. And so just to suggest in this moment that, the breath becomes like an inner masseuse, and it can massage the tissues right in front of the sacral plate and enliven, vagus nerve running down from brainstem all the way through low colon, touching all the way through pelvic floor, that the breath can enliven and return us to the belly brain, which has its own capacity for meaningfulness and momentum that's much slower than the frequency the mind stream, the proclivities of the psyche tend to move more frenetically with.
I know in certain traditions there's a recognition of the breath at the base of the nose and the sensation of air coming in and going out. And then in other traditions, there's this awareness of the breath at the belly. And how when we're born, we're often natural belly breathers. If you look at children, newborns, and then somehow life brings us into the upper chest and shoulders, and our breathing becomes more constricted. And so I love this visualization of Saturn and the rings of Saturn, and breathing into the belly and activating this lower center of gravity within me, so that when the winds of life are blowing me here and there, that I can hold that vision of Saturn and the rings and my breath and a lower center of gravity to help me be grounded and connected to myself as I'm interfacing with life that's in constant flux around me.
So beautifully put. And the word that's starting to shine out of this conversation so far is equanimity. For me, that symbolizes that there's an actual safety corridor, a safe haven, a sanctuary in the fabric of this body mind that I can regularly and routinely and quite ritualistically return to be with myself irrespective of conditions, irregardless of what's occurring around me and within me, having hara as this anchored support, a resource to be with myself, if even for a few breaths, and there's that sacred pause, just a few breaths can reunite me with my ground of being, so that I may be more resourced to navigate what I'm here to meet.
I love that. I love the phrase, the ground of being, and the resource that comes from connecting with the ground of our own being. it's really, for me, speaking to an access point to our divinity, to spirit, and to oneness with all that is, to connection. So thank you for sharing about this. I loved what you spoke about in terms of each of us having a place of safety within us. And that is super, super important, because we all have fears, like the fear of death and all its reflections and reverberations, and how it plays out in our life and our patterns and in our karma. And to practice and to access a place within us where we can go and always feel safe seems massively important. So I want to know more about that. Tell us about that safe place that we all have.
Yes, in the Dharma streams, we call it bodhicitta, right? The Buddha nature. In yoga, we call it Atman. Some people call it God consciousness, higher spirit, soul, self with a capital S, right? In internal family systems therapy, we call it self energy. And so all of these different wisdom traditions suggest that there's this core innate, like a family heirloom, a resource you were born in with that's not the age you are, the roles you play, the hats you wear. It's you beneath your parts. And it was with you from time before time before time, this ancient primordial elixir that we have moments throughout the lifespan of connecting to and remembering, and then we'll forget lifelong too. I call it spiritual amnesia. We'll remember and forget and remember and forget lifelong who we really are. And all the more important, just Eden, as you were reflecting, I'm being reminded of people along my path, right? Earth angels that were able to reflect to me who I really was, who I really am in those seasons that we forget. And I'm bringing that in because while there's self energy and while there's the belly breath and while there's that primal return to the inner sanctum, we can't do it alone. And we will need earth angels lifelong to guide us and bring us back home when we do forget. It takes a team to hold us. We're a tribal species. We're a communal species. And I think so many of us on the spiritual path enter in with the assumption that the practices in solitude and the isolation eras are where we evolve most rapidly. But I'm finding more and more as we go that it's the people we come close to, that we rub up against, that remind us of our human nature and then our divinity, our Buddha nature. Those earth angels are essential on our path of awakening. In fact, the Buddha was known to say that half of spiritual life is having a spiritual friend, be it a good therapist, a really conscious lover, a mentor, teachers sprinkled along. This is the Sangha, right? This is your spiritual family. And we need that lifelong to turn the mirror back in and remind us of our elegant, awakened nature. We're just going to forget, probably daily, probably multiple times a day, who we really are beneath it all.
And so I hear you, and reflecting upon our true nature, our Buddha nature, the Atma, and how can people connect with that? How can you, what can you share today to help people simply connect with that safe space that is so nourishing and connected to everything and everyone? You know, so much of the time we're reaching out into the external because we feel a sense of lack. Because maybe in this moment or that moment we're not connected and we feel like we need to reach out. So tell us, Kali, what are some simple ways to help us reconnect with ourselves in that safe place?
One of the most impactful and potent suggestions that I've used to remind myself of this essence is the Buddha's first noble truth, which was that life includes suffering and life includes moments of disconnect, right? His very first offering as an enlightened being was there's dukkha, there's pain. You will meet challenge and difficulty, and there's heartbreak and there's grief and loss. And so to be reminded of that, I don't think is morbid, quite the opposite. It's this life affirming opening for me in my system to be reminded of, oh yeah, even in those occurrences where I'm uncertain or anxious or ambivalent or apathetic, right? Any of those disconnection strategies that we have, that difficulty isn't something we have to navigate and circumvent in order to come home to ourselves. It is the path, right? All mishaps are the path. And there's such a liberation when I'm reminded of this. There's such a easeful descent into the belly and into this hara corridor of we're not here to just feel blissful and spacious all the time. We'd be with the deities in another realm, right? The human realm. It's a adult education crash course. We receive a body and we learn lessons in this body, right? Like or hate the body, it's ours for the duration of this trajectory. And like or hate the lessons, they're not mistakes, they're lessons. And so to be with what's here and the cacophony and the distaste of it, the inconvenience of it, and to know that, oh, this too is part of this precious form, this precious life. You know, when I was pregnant with my son, he's almost 2 now, and I could feel him, you know, awakening in the womb and kind of glimpsing the world. And he would hear sirens, right? He would hear ambulance sirens, and he would also hear classical music. I would play cello music whenever I could, and he would hear. I took him to a concert at the Hollywood Bowl, and you know he would hear me and my partner making love, and he would hear us arguing, and everything coming in. I would just put my hands to my belly, and I would say to him, "This too, this too." This is part of the world that you're entering into. And so, whether you're birthing a being or just birthing more of your own being into awareness, I think the hand on the belly, that descent, and the equanimity inquiry of, oh, this too, this heartbreak, this joy, what the Buddha called the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sufferings of being alive. Am I willing to be with this too, if even for a breath?
It's a real welcoming. I find that in my own life, that if I can just stop for a moment and drop the stories in my mind and take a few nice deep cycles of breath, and I can move into a space of softening and welcoming what's arising, whatever it might be, that whatever it is that might be is another opportunity to drop into myself. And so what I hear you saying is that each moment, whether it be good or bad, right or wrong, up or down, whatever the dichotomy is, that each moment holds within it the doorway home to that safe place within ourselves that is deeply abundant and resourceful and nourishing, a center point, a grounded space, a place of home. If we're willing to just shift things for a few moments and stop and take that pause that we were talking about earlier and drop into this beingness that is part of human being, what I consider the gateway to our divinity. Also, one of the reflections that you shared about the people in our lives, the Sangha, the community, it's like even though we are everything and everyone and connected to it all, it's in the reflection of the community and our friends and intimate partners and teachers that help us see ourselves more clearly and do this important work. So those are some of my reflections or responses to what you've been sharing, which has been so beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's essential. It's essential that we have these earth angels on the path lifelong to remind us. And I'm reminded of really who that first being was for me uh, at such a young age when we require externalized support to keep us safe. And so the early years is really where the psyche learns to either rest or wrestle with our own nature. And if we have along the path early on caretakers or teachers, or for me, it was my grandmother who was the really first awakened being I felt to look into my eyes and gaze with this unconditional reverence for who I was, even as such a young one, that there are people along our journey that are going to be those earth angels to love us unconditionally. So for me, my grandmother was really one of those first beings, moments with her where I felt self energy turn on, because when you're fully and truly seen, when you're adored, when you're held and nurtured, that need to be held and cradled, it doesn't halt at infancy. It's an essential requirement lifelong.
And it models how we can treat ourselves. It's like modeling is in parenting. You have coming up on a 2-year-old. Is that how old is your son, right?
Yeah, almost two.
And I have 4 kids of ages 18 to 25. And what an incredible journey it is. And one of the things that I've learned from being a son and being a child and a family and being a father. So much learning. Wow, what a holy fire. The holiest of fires and deepest of teachers, family and intimate relationship. But if we can have these angels who can show us that love, that unconditional love, and we can learn that in our patterning, in our neurology, that we can love ourselves in that way. And as we love ourselves in that way, that unconditional way, it's like we're just activating that energy and that higher vibration within ourselves that then we can share with other people.
Right. And it's also so clear the more that you're reminded of self, of Buddha nature, of this awakened spirit, it becomes so clear when we oscillate away from that into different parts. And so from the internal family systems dialect to be able to accommodate all of the different parts of the psyche and recognize them in their own niche and skills and roles and responsibilities. But to have time with what I call for myself the inner mother, this benevolent, nurturing source, the wellspring, right? The reservoir of the whole pranic body down here at the low belly. Like, this is who I am beneath all the parts that I play. And the more that you sink into self energy, the clearer it becomes when we're playing a part, which isn't bad or wrong, but has a limited capacity for being with the full complexity of life.
But would you say that there is a polarity with each of these different roles and parts of ourselves? Like there could be a darker side to each part and a lighter side. And are we trying to access the resource or the lighter side of those parts in terms of supporting our journey?
I would think of it more as each part comes in through self energy, right? Each part is born of a benevolent intention. And sometimes their actions are misguided because they're limited in their worldview. They're born in based on what the needs in that moment required. So if there was a deep trauma, then the system will create, what I like to call heart armor, or these protective shields of managers or defenders that will create more rigidity to bomb us or bar us from vulnerability. And so that hardness or that rigidity is not to be seen as a darkness necessarily, but to know in its original birth, in its original initiation, that it was born in with a benevolent intention to safeguard, to protect. And so all of our parts, we have to assume and really be reminded by our earth angels, by our therapists, by our loved ones, that these parts that can have some peculiar, sometimes competitive, sometimes dismantling or disturbing features of reactivity, that innately they are good, just as we all are good. We're all born in with that Buddha nature, as are our parts. And so to delve underneath the parts reactions, we call some of the parts firefighters, right? Because they're willing to just hose the whole house down for fear of feeling pain and overwhelm again. But even beneath the destruction of our parts impacts, that they're good and that they're afraid and that they're doing some really heavy work that requires some support from the inner mother.
Is there a reference other than yourself to, if anybody's interested in learning more about IFS, work, is there a link that we can add or something that you can share?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, Richard Schwartz really brought this model into being, though the idea of parts work, far outdates the internal family systems model. I have found IFS to be such a potent intersection of that Eastern reference of Buddha mind and the Western protocol for cataloging these distinct aspects of the psyche. So I really recommend diving into Richard Schwartz's work from the Internal Family Systems Institute. One of his most potent books, I feel, came out recently called No Bad Parts. And then in addition to that, I lead online IFS immersion to really meld the cohesion of parts coming back home to the self with yoga as a physical practice. Yoga is union, is integration. It's the integration of the koshas, of the layers, of the parts within. And so having a physical embodiment practice, that somatic stream to bring parts work in. That way, I feel like we've got the psychological, the spiritual, and the somatic pillars held simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, the more that I journey into myself and this process of personal growth and development and remembering, as you say, and reconnecting with the truth of who I am, the more that I understand the importance of somatic work and being the witness and connecting with the energies that are inside my body as a gateway deeper to the presence of my own being. So I really appreciate that. I also really love this whole concept with IFS or parts work where we have these different entities that arise out of need in important times, potentially traumatic times, and they're really here to help us, and maybe more of a Western psychological framework, coping mechanisms from early in life that later on in life can become addictive patterns which no longer serve. And so how can we connect with these patterns and parts and see the benefit, the beneficial nature of them, how they came to be through self-inquiry, and how we can use them as allies to support our journey forward through self-inquiry and through understanding and such. So I really love all that. And we're coming close to the end of our time together, Kali, and what a great meeting for me personally. I wanted to just thank you so much for your spirit, and I loved what you've had to share. And I know we've only touched upon your experiences and understandings, and connection is the medicine is our foundation. And we have satellites in Colorado at True Nature in Carbondale, Colorado, and then here at Loma Sagrada in Nosara, Costa Rica. But I understand that you're going to be coming and teaching at True Nature in Colorado, and I'd love to represent that and hear you share a little bit more about what you're going to be doing there.
Thank you for bringing that in. True nature, Eden is truly one of my favorite places to be and to teach and to practice. So it's always a privilege to return, and I look forward to being there this spring. Every spring, in fact, the concept is to be offering what I'm calling a spring intensive at True Nature Healing Arts. And so we plunge deep down into the Kiva, which is such a site to me, a temple that uh, radiates the same quality of earth energy, of that subtle gravitational landing, that safety that the Hara does. And so it really is a Hara center temple. And in that space, Yeah, in that space, we'll be streaming each spring through these pillars I mentioned. For a really rich and robust practice life, you need the somatic for certain. It's essential and it's insufficient. And so I felt for a long time like my yoga practice was missing the psychological inquiry that internal family systems offers. And then the spiritual navigation that Buddhism draws in me towards problem solving with the material at hand. I really see the Buddha Dharma as a set of skillful suggestions for navigating the complexity of life. And so feeling like in a practice, we've got the somatic, we've got the psychological, we've got the spiritual as pillars to sustain us lifelong, whatever season we're in, so that we can remind ourselves who we really are. And I'll just bring in, lastly, one of my favorite lines from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It says, "O nobly born, O you who are the sons and the daughters of the awakened ones, remember who you really are."
May we all remember the truth of who we are, and may we find that safe space within of resource and love. Kali, thank you so much for joining me. What an honor and a blessing to be with you. And I can't wait, and I hope you'll join me again in the future, because I feel like we just barely opened up the door. So thank you so much.
Such a privilege. More to come, and see you all on the path.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on Connection is the Medicine. This podcast is sponsored by the Connection is the Medicine Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to co-creating connection to self, community, nature, and spirit. I hope this conversation inspires you to connect with deeper meaning and purpose in your life. To learn more about our offerings at True Nature in Carbondale, Colorado, and Loma Sagrada in Nosara, Costa Rica, please visit connectionisthemedicine.com. Blessings on your day, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon.